we'll kind of dive into and then Emmy will provide some reflections, and then we'll dive into the substance of the conversation. So I am your moderator for tonight. My name is Reem Adi, and I'm originally Sudanese, though I was born and raised in the DC area. I'm currently a senior at Harvard College. I study Gov Data Science with a secondary in computer science and a language citation in Arabic. And I'm super passionate about the topics of democratization and development in East Africa. By extension and by identity, the topics of anti-Blackness and racism are super, super important to me, especially given the fact that my Sudanese identity and kind of the struggles of Sudan with Arabization as a nation that's name literally translates to Land of the Blacks. So I'm happy to be holding this conversation here today with such an amazing speaker as well. And so yes, I will now introduce Emmy. So Emmy Mahmoud is a two-time world champion poet, Goodwill Ambassador for UNHCR, which is the UN Refugee Agency. She was named one of BBC's 100 Most Inspirational Women. She is an activist, an author, and an entrepreneur, and co-founded a Sickle Cell research initiative at age 19. She has since worked with President Obama, the Dalai Lama, Google Quantum AI, and so much more. Emmy has also given multiple presentations to the UN General Assembly, the World Economic Forum in Davos, Forbes 30 Under 30, and other high-level events. So we're super privileged to have her with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
This introduction is far from over, though. In 2017, Emmy created and hosted the first fully inclusive civilian peace talks and roundtables across Sudan. She then, in 2018, as the founder of One Girl Walk and Dreams for Peace initiatives, walked 1,000 kilometers for peace in 30 days, mobilizing thousands of people along the way.
Not in these shoes.
In the final stages of the 2020 Darfur Peace Agreement, Emmy acted as an independent advisor on civilian inclusion and citizenship representation, putting forth unprecedented recommendations for civil liberties, gender equality, education, refugee rights, inclusion, diversity, and the rights of all vulnerable populations across the country. She is a TED speaker and MIT Solve team lead, and was featured among Harper Bazaar's New Changemakers of 2020, alongside several other groundbreaking artists, leaders, and entrepreneurs. And in 2022, she featured as the cover girl for Marie Claire's Arabia's Women Month issue for her work in advocacy for gender equity in the region and beyond. Her collaborations have her serving at the forefront of change in each space she enters, from the Expo in Dubai in collaboration with Cartier, to the UN climate conferences, COP26 and COP27 in Egypt, and more. And in 2022, Emmy joined the leadership of Spitar, a telehealth startup on the continent, bringing access to quality healthcare in post-conflict communities and serving 1.8 million people to date. Her efforts have seen the company named as an MIT Solver team, taking home the Johnson & Johnson Ventures Health Access Prize, and more as she leads their expansion into Sudan. Emmy also graduated from Yale in 2016, casually.
Thank you, guys.
And so yes, super, super amazing speaker and guest that we have with us today. And so I'm super, super excited to dive into such an important and rarely talked about topic with her. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Emmy for kind of reflections, just sort of on the topic in general, and then we'll afterwards go into moderated questions.
Thank you so much. That was very exciting, but also embarrassing, but in a good way. It's so funny because when we learned about this topic, actually, Reem, I'm so excited to be here with you, and I'm so glad that you came up with this incredible panel. And I just got super excited because for me, I think that a lot of times, as you heard, I've been in a lot of different spaces, right? I was at Davos for the 4th time a couple of months ago. I've spoken on the floor of the General Assembly many times, worked with whoever, wherever, didn't know a lot of their names, but still made it work and things like that. But it's not often that I get to speak to people that are essentially from similar places to where I'm from, right? And what was interesting is that I rarely get to talk about this topic. So it seems to be a very interesting dichotomy that we touched on. And I was reflecting on something that you said about how it is that a lot of times and you've probably experienced this, if you're, well, I'm assuming everyone in here is not white, but there might be one person who might be. But if you're a person of color, you've experienced probably during some of whatever happens, like there's a protest or there's, I don't know, you hear about Syria or you hear about different things that happen. I'm sure you have friends who text you and go like, I'm so sorry, you're the closest thing to a Black person or a Syrian person or an Arab person that I know, you know. And the reality is that for Black people, it's even more pronounced, generally speaking, in that you're expected not only to be an ambassador of your race, but you're also expected to be the educator, to teach everyone about everything that they need to know, because it's not something that is expected for people to know. You're considered well-versed and educated if you read the New York Times every day or you keep up to date with current events. But it's not considered a requirement to understand racial relations or intersectionality or a lot of these different things, and that's very important. The other thing that I'll say that's interesting about all of this is, hold on, wait, this is important. The other thing that's the interesting other side of it is, like I said, I've been in all of these different spaces, but I rarely ever got to talk about race. It's almost like the more you move into, let's say, more consequential spaces, which I'll talk more about that because I think these are actually the most consequential spaces. But when you go to high-level events and different things like that, and it's almost like people try to mask or not talk about where you're from, or your race, or your history, or the fact that you're a refugee or a former refugee, or different things like that. So for me, it's bittersweet. I'm so excited to be talking about it. I've been at this conference before. I've talked about many different topics, gave the keynote yesterday, gave a keynote here before, but I'm very, very excited to talk about something near and dear to my heart, and hopefully shake things up. So thank you all for being here also.
So exciting. Again, I'm going to repeat. I'm super, super, super excited to have this conversation. First iteration of this panel happened last year. I proposed it at the 2019 Arab Conference. It didn't happen. And so last year, worked to make this happen as much as possible. Had an amazing panel, and this is the second time that it's happening, second time that it's recurring. And I think that this is a conversation, it shouldn't just be the second time. There should be a third and a fourth and a fifth. And this conversation is important to have in every space until we actually realize change in our societies and in Arab society specifically. With that, we're gonna jump into moderated questions. So, okay, first one I have is, I think that for a lot of non-Black people, which just kind of looking at the room, that's pretty much most people here, it is difficult to conceptualize what anti-Blackness and racism looks like in the Arab world and how actions can contribute to systemic violence. So can you talk to us kind of a little bit about this and what these practices may include, whatever you're comfortable.
So we talked a little bit about this. I've actually decided that since it's become like a fireside chat kind of situation, I'm gonna answer some questions in answers and some of them in poems. So this poem is called Bullets. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about that answer. This poem, I wrote it in 2013. I wrote it when there were protests and blackouts and a lot of different things happening in Sudan. Okay, here goes. My father's voice yanked me awake. My brother had been shot. I'd never felt fear like that, waiting for that first breath on the other side of the line at a hospital half a world away. The thing we'd been fighting for the past 11 years had reached the capital and burrowed itself into my next of kin. I'm 21 years old, and I know more about death than about living. My life experiences revolve around massacres and funerals. I know how to start revolutions, but I don't know how to lose myself. I don't know how to give in to this thing called youth because I know how it ends. I call my brother an idiot, and he says, live free or die. He says, freedom is a question of life. If you do not reach for it, then you're not alive. The distinct flavor of anarchy stinks of murder, stains like the blood of a good patriot, and leaves a bitter thirst in your mouth only quenched by liberation. That week, burning cities made me feel numb. Bullets made me think of my brother, so I closed my eyes And I dreamt of lead, of gutted window panes, of Damascus, of Gaza, of Baltimore. And when I awoke, breathing made me feel guilty, makes me feel guilty, like I should have been there, like I should have fought, like I should have stood and faced the firing squad. When you fight for freedom, you stomach pain like that. This body should be lined with bullets, one for each of my brothers and sisters who stopped a bullet for me. This is the mark of my generation. We are more accustomed to the weight of Molotov cocktails on our bodies than we are to the embrace of one another. Live free or die, die free or live. I want to live in a time where civil disobedience doesn't end in death, where children aren't born under the full moon of revolution, where I haven't lost more people than there are years in my life. This changes you. And I don't want this kind of wisdom. I'm still too young for this kind of pain. It changes you, and not in an earth-moving, ground-breaking kind of way, but bit by bit, and with incredible stillness. It's the little things, like how I cringe at the word protest, like how I don't trust anyone who isn't fighting, like how I am as comfortable with sleeping bodies as I am with dead ones, because it's all the same. My brother hears me frowning through the phone. He says, "Smile, you'll live longer." Thank you. You guys. Whew, that's a tough one to do. So my answer, as you've heard in part of the poem, and I will come back to this poem quite a few times, is that being Black is something that's very hard to explain when you're not Black, right? So I'm going to try to get you guys to put yourselves in, how do you say, almost like we'll do a little exercise. My background is in anthropology, as you heard. We'll do a little bit of a background exercise. I want you to start first, raise your hand if you've ever felt like you are other or like a minority in the space that you were in. Great. Keep your hand up. Sorry, it's like exercise. Keep your hand up if you've felt that way in a school setting. Keep your hand up if it's a work setting. Okay, keep your hand up if you felt that way in a social space. Now, put your hand down if there is somewhere else that you can go where you don't feel that way. Keep your hand up if that place is not with your family. Keep your hand up if that place is not a different country. As you can see, okay, you can put your hands on now. As you can see, hands start to go down, right? What's really interesting is that when you humanize something, or when you try to start the conversation about what it's like to feel otherized in a different space, you tend to have a feeling that it's isolated, or it's something that can be contained, where it may be at work, maybe at school, but when you go home, or when you go to a different country, or when you're among people who look like you, or understand, or speak the same language, that you feel like you're okay. The thing about being Black is that you can't leave it. It doesn't matter where you go in the world, because of the way that racial hierarchies exist, no matter where you are in the world, and how they translate across contexts. It's something that you can't necessarily leave. So at the dinner table or at home, I'm hearing conversations with my younger siblings. I'm the oldest of 6 kids. The youngest one is 6 years old. It's just so cute. And whether it's my little sister growing up in Philly or my little cousins growing up in Sudan, the conversations that we have are not always simple things. Like when you're going to college, your parents tell you, pay attention, don't talk to too many boys or girls or whatever, right? Or, study hard. But if you're Black, the conversation might start that way, and then it suddenly goes to, make sure you don't wear a hoodie and walk at night. Make sure you only walk in groups. Don't speak too loudly in class. Don't make anyone angry. They might hurt you or hate you. Your professor might change your grade, et cetera, et cetera. The conversations are the things that we have to warn our children about. I don't have children, but I have younger siblings, and it's very similar, right? Are very difficult. And some of the hardest conversations are trying to figure out, well, what do you do? Do you isolate your kids? My youngest sister, I remember we were getting ready for a party, and my mom decided to flat iron our hair or something. Not Muntaha's hair, she's so cute, she's so little, but we don't do that. But you know, when we were very little, they'd perm our hair, but it was like, that was like an old-fashioned type of thing. We don't do that anymore. But I remember we were just like, I know, it's so weird, I'm a hijab and talking about my hair. Anyway, so flat iron our hair, it was like a hinda, right? And my little sister sees my hair straightened, and then she's just like, oh my God, you're blonde. And I'm like, whoa. She was 4, I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, well, your hair looks really straight and really nice. I want my hair to be blonde too. And I'm just like, where did you hear this? And she's like, well, the shows that she watches with the little kids in it, right? There's always like a princess or someone, but she tends to be blonde. And my sister, very little back then, she was 4 when this happened. She just understood blonde to mean like straight hair and things like that. And so I stopped flat ironing my hair with my sister. I was like, nope, never again. But that's the question, like, where do you go? Like, do you never let them go to the movies? Are they not allowed to learn about Elsa and Anna? Do you only get them dolls that are black? Like, what do you do? Do you think about these questions? Are these things that you have to think about? When you're searching things on media, you're looking for tutorials or whatever, you have to type in the thing you're looking for and then write black woman or black man. And things like that, because we're not the mainstream, we're not the center, and we're not allowed to be the center, but at the same time, we're not allowed to leave that context. But hopefully it's changing. So imagine if you had to keep your hands raised for the whole time. Imagine if there wasn't a place that you could go. There wasn't something that you could take off. Like a lot of people, you might not have heard of this, but there's something called passing that happens in America. People started talking about it during the slave trade in America, like during the times of slavery when the masters would rape their slaves, and a lot of children of those masters were treated better and kept in the house because their skin was lighter. So eventually, this happened so often that you would have kids who were black, but who could pass as white. So for safety, they would flatten their hair and do all these different things, and in that way they could escape their blackness. I'm sure that it happens, and I know that it happens in the Arab world as well. Proximity to whiteness sometimes means success. Sometimes it's from colonization. Sometimes it's from just seeing how the world is built. Sometimes it's color contacts. Sometimes it's dyeing our hair or flattening it. Sometimes it's dressing a certain way or speaking a certain way, or not saying that you're from a specific country, just saying that, oh, I'm from Boston or Cambridge when you're in here, or saying you're from New Haven if you're at Yale. That was a long answer, but.
That was such a good answer. Like the poem was absolutely astonishing, and it makes so much sense. And like, I think I'm going to be a bad moderator because I will also add in comments at times because of how personal this topic is. No, it makes me happy, yeah. On like the subject of siblings too, I remember when my sister was so my sisters and I all went to Islamic school for a really long time, and so when she was maybe like 7 years old, she came home from school and was like absolutely devastated, crying, and then she's like, Mama, this boy named, I remember his name until this day, like Kareem, asked me why my skin is like the color of poop. And you know, like these are the things that we carry. And it was another time, same sister, during Ramadan, I want to say she was maybe 8 years old by this point. So I was 15, 16, something like that. And we were watching, it might have actually been more recent, and we were watching NBC. And as you guys all know, there's like a lot of like and like shows that happen during Ramadan and stuff like that, especially like comedy. So it was an Egyptian comedy show, and there's the actress, I can't remember her full name, it's like Shaymat something. She's a comedy actress in Egypt. Used to love her work. She was doing a skit that day of her on a bus, and she was in blackface and was drunk in Ramadan. And like, I know that not necessarily everyone in the like Arab world happens to be Muslim, but like this is in the Muslim context. And the accent that she was playing was like of someone who came from like Sudan, or specifically like South Sudan. And I immediately shut the TV, tried to distract my sister as much as I could. But like at the end of the day, this is the reality of our experiences and what we're confronted, what like a lot of Black people happen to be confronted with in the Arab world. Like constant images, I think, that people don't really realize the harm of because it's been normalized over time. but like continues to impact us and our psyche and like becomes ingrained in us as trauma and then passed down time and time again. I mean, my sister was born in 2008. So I was born probably like all of you are in school by then and stuff like that. And like she is 14 years old right now, but like this is stuff that continues to persist and doesn't seem to be changing. And so like this is why we need conversations like this to kind of shift the narrative. And just these are really, really small examples of what systemic violence kind of look like. But when we don't talk about them, that's when they continue to persist. Moving from this, I think this is like kind of grounding ourselves more in the conversation also. My next question that I have for you is, do you identify as Arab? Many Black Arabs or those who are born into this identity undergo a conscious process of choosing not to identify as Arab, myself included. And the reasons for this range from politics to social interactions to the knowledge that the Arab identity and all the pride associated with it sometimes carries a lot of harm for Black people. So I want to know, do you identify as Arab? Why so or why not? And what kind of associations does this identity carry for you?
Thank you so much, and thank you for sharing the story. I'm actually glad you mentioned that because there's just so much to talk about. It's hard. So I was thinking about this before. I was like thinking about how growing up in the U.S. So like a lot of, I think some people know, but not everybody knows. My family and I escaped to Yemen when I was 1. And from Yemen, we got the visa lottery, very random, to the U.S. And that's why I say former refugee as part of UNHCR. We say former refugee, even though I'm still a refugee. Once a refugee until you're safe to go home. Because the asylum process in the US is very different than getting the visa lottery. And in a lot of ways, I'm very privileged to have gotten it through our mom. But in Yemen, they used to be like, Inti Yemeniya or Sudaniya? And I learned when I was like 2, right, to say, Sudaniya, Mia, right? And everybody would laugh, right? And they'd be like, no, Inti Yemeniya. And it was just very, very funny because it was an interesting time because when you're that young, you don't really know much about your identity. You know that you have a mom, a dad, probably, like you probably have your parents with you in the context that I was in. You have siblings. When your a younger sibling is born now, part of your identity is being an older sibling. But because of the context of the skin color and just growing up in Sana'a, you had that added layer of people asking you those questions, right? And those were the beginnings of starting to learn these things. Later, I find out from my parents that when they got the visa lottery and had to go get a specific form stamped by the Mufawwadiyya saying that they hadn't committed any crimes, the people at the counter refused to stamp it. They said, they basically said, you're Black, Abid, et cetera, we're not gonna do this, it's supposed to be for Yemenis, right? And my dad was a surgeon, and he was very renowned, and my mom, a medical lab technician, and they were revolutionaries, and the way that we got kicked out of Sudan was we were political refugees. They wrote, we'll get to Sudan eventually, but they wrote, my dad wrote a report about some of the atrocities happening there. So he had a lot of friends in high places, and they were very apologetic. They came and they stamped it in our house. But that doesn't happen for everyone, right? So my dad just had the luck and the privilege of being a surgeon and being in the context of having helped during the war in Aden with the, medical things and things like that. But those are those moments where you start to see something shift from being individual to being systemic. So fast forward to being in the US. Suddenly there's the other layer. In Yemen, I was Sudaniya, not Yemeniya, right? Get to the US, okay, kids at school, you're not American. Okay, what am I? I guess I'm Sudanese, right? Eventually, I'm in English as a second language class. They keep me there for years, even though I'm acing English, because they say, you still have an accent. And I'm like, are you serious? I remember this. And now they use my poetry in English as a second language classes by how the tables have turned. But I remember, like, in those moments, like, can you imagine being kept like out of normal class and kept in English as a second language class because they said, say apple. And I'm like, abil. And they're like, say apple. I'm like, abil. I'm saying it. They're like, say, what is this word? I'm like, Asia. They're like, Asia. And I'm like, Asia. Like, it's the same. But I can read, I can write, and I could do everything fine. Like, and I was getting better grades than other kids, but I had to stay in the class. So I wasn't American. I was Sudanese. Okay, fine, Sudanese. Keep going. Eventually, I'm Sudanese American, right? Eventually, I start feeling like I'm Sudanese American. Am I Arab American? No. Till this day, I've never identified as Arab American because the Arab American circles are very different. Very, very different, very segregated, very separate from being part of the Black diaspora, even though in the Arab diaspora, there are tons of Black people. And in the Arab world, there are tons of Black people. And in the Black diaspora, there are Arab people. But because of the structures and the racism that exists, that was never opened up to me. And then another layer happens. Eventually, I come home and I'm like, Mom, Dad, did you know we're Black? And they're just like, no, we're Sudanese. I'm like, no, we're Black. And they're like, no, you're African. I'm like, yeah, African American and also Black. They're like, no, because it meant something else back home. We're from a country called Sudan, land of the Blacks, right? But for some reason, it almost became like a dirty word because of not just colonization, the slave trade, which we'll talk a little bit more about, a lot of other things that happened and that existed in that space because proximity to whiteness might mean success because of colonialism and how people were taught. I told you earlier that if you could pass in America, you were treated better. If you were the illegitimate child of, a slave owner from rape and abuse and slavery, right? You were kept in the house and you were treated better, but you were still a slave. Like you were still treated terribly. You were still owned and you didn't have rights, but you were in the house. And it started to become all over the world that proximity to whiteness is good. So what is the counter of that? Proximity to Blackness is bad. That's the counter. And a lot of people don't see that when they are reinforcing or when they're gravitating to the whiteness or trying to get the validity of the white man, which is how they talk about him in some of the Arabic classes. It's so funny. My fiance, he's in an Arabic class that we're in right now, and the teacher is Tunisian. I'm going to talk about Tunisia in a bit. And what's so interesting is there's this one kid who's a white guy, and he went to Jordan when he was little, and he really wanted to read and learn Arabic, so he's in class. So whenever she's talking about colonialism, she's just like, and the white man. And then she just keeps going. And it's fascinating because adding the layer of humor to it makes it easier to discuss things that were very, very violent. They were a subjugation and different things. Even now, there are countries all over the world who try very, very hard to appeal to who? Whose validation or whose approval are we seeking? Exactly. I love the book Orientalism. I was about to say I love Orientalism. No. I love the book by Mahmoud Mamdani. He's one of the best anthropologists. And it's amazing because he talks about how that lens can't be removed. So when you're talking about Blackness in the Arab world, you have to remember that in that context, you are the white man. You have to remember that when you are in that conversation, you can't take off that lens. And that's what Mahmoud Mamdani says about Orientalism. He says that if you are a white person writing about the Arab world or about Black people or about anything, you cannot remove the context of writing it in English and the context of your history and all those different things that happened that are influencing your relationship, not just with the people, but with the topic. So when you're in the Arab world and you're talking about Blackness, you need to understand you're the white man because that history is very fraught. And that history is alive today because it's still happening right now. So do I identify as Arab? Weird answer. Actually, I identify as Afro-Arab because my grandmother on my mom's side, I'm indigenous African. I'm 3/4 indigenous African. But also if you're in Sudan, you're indigenous. Like you have an indigenous background. You're not indigenous African per se, but like you have some indigenous person in your background because you're Black. Come on. Like, and it's a fact, like there's people can trace their ancestry. I think lineage is interesting in the Arab world. It's patrilineal mostly. And because of that, I think differences are exaggerated. So a lot of our mothers, our Black mothers, are hidden in lineage and in culture. So you have a lot of people in Sudan saying, no, I'm Arab because my dad's dad, and I'm like, okay, what about all the moms? And they're like, I don't know, actually. Some people know, but some people don't. I know that my mom's mom is, she's from 2 different Arab tribes, Afro-Arab tribes. To me, I'm Afro-Arab because we're indigenous, we're African. We're African, but there's something about it. And that actually brings me to what does Arab mean? When I was teaching Arabic in high school and in college and stuff like that, we'd have fun moments, and then someone says like, wait, what does Arab mean? And then you start looking it up, and you start learning that a lot of people have different definitions. Sometimes Arab means somebody who speaks Arabic. Sometimes Arab means somebody who is from a very specific region of the world, right? Sometimes Arab means that your grandpa or someone is from some specific tribe that is historically Arab or historically African or whatever it is. What does it mean, and who gets to define it? And that's something that I've been struggling with over time, especially working with refugees, especially being Indigenous African, and especially considering that Arab supremacy, aka white supremacy, was the reason that the genocide was perpetuated in Sudan. If you go back before, I think maybe like the 80s or the 70s, like I'm gonna check the dates later, but if you go back before, if you look at Darfur and other parts of Sudan, you could just say what tribe you were if you wanted to do something different, which sounds really funny. It's really interesting to learn. So like if you were, if you wanted to be a merchant and you knew that a certain tribe were really good merchants, people would say like, what tribe are you? And you would say you're that tribe, because it was fluid. Identity was fluid. People would say what they wanted to say, and even names. We were talking about it yesterday at dinner. In Lebanon, like you would have people's last names being the work that they did. So like Haddad or different things like that, right? Identity didn't used to be so rigid until you start to before you weaponize it, you politicize it, and before you politicize it, you use it to segregate and to section off. In Sudan, the partition, you guys should look up the partition act or whatever it was called when the British came, and how South Sudanese people and North Sudanese people were separated more than usual, to down to very intimate details like not being allowed to name your child a Muslim name if you were a Christian, because they couldn't tell us apart, and they wanted to tell us apart. So my question is, who started telling us that we were different? And who started defining these different things? And who gets to define it? So there are different reactions you can have to being otherized. You can accept it, which I wouldn't recommend. You can repel it. So I feel like this is like another thing about oppression in general. I say that when oppression happens, you can do nothing, you can repel it, or you can push back against it, right? So my thing is that I had the choice when I was being told that I'm not American. It's like, well, I could just accept it and be like, okay, I guess I'll never call myself American. I could push back against it and say, no, actually I'm gonna vehemently say that I'm anti-American and that I'm only African, which I can do. Or I can say, no, I'm very, very American, I'm not even African, right? What is the other solution? Well, we start to work outside of the boundaries that are set for us. You start to dismantle the things that uphold that oppression. You start to change the story. Who gets to tell the story? Who gets to say what Arab means? To me, it means my grandma's tribe. She's also African. She's very African. She was Allah yarhamha, but she was like one of the most African people I've ever met. But I'm also African, and I think that for me, being from Philadelphia is another layer. Like I don't always say that I'm American. I say I'm from Philly because it means something else too, and it means something else to my black identity. And also, my godfather is a founder of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and he worked with Martin Luther King Jr. So I even know as well, being part of the African diaspora is another layer of privilege, of intersectionality of these different things, but it also means responsibility. So it's a long answer, but the answer is not exactly, kind of, maybe, we'll see.
Thank you so much for those insights. I agree. Identity is super fluid. And like I think just a lot of people in the Arab world in general go through like this conscious realization of, hey, do I want to, especially more white passing people, do I want to tap into this identity? And like when we look at the history in the United States, one of the panels that's going to be, I'm not sure if it's today or tomorrow, but it's the question of MENA on the census, right? And this representation of like what Arabs look like, because right now people are told to fill out white, and that's not necessarily representative. But if we look back historically at why that is, it's because in the early 1900s, Syrian and Lebanese immigrants who first came to the United States petitioned to be included as white, and so that they would be able to fill out white. And the reason for that was because back then, like, you had very strict hierarchies. So if you came from Asia, you were considered Mongolian. You didn't necessarily have the same work opportunities. So what gets you to the places that you want to go? Being white. Today, in like the aftermath of 9/11, that's not necessarily the case anymore. And like filling out white is actually a huge disadvantage because that's not how you're perceived in the public space. And kind of in that same way that identity is like fluid in that context, like I think that's how like identification as Arab or not as Arab works for a lot of people who are Black in the Arab world. I grew up, again, going to Islamic school. There you had like a very strict delineation. You're either Desi or you're Arab, right? And I wasn't necessarily sure. My dad does not identify as Arab. My mom does. We are not indigenously Arab. We are indigenously Nubian. And so I grew up and I was like, okay, well, I guess the closest thing, I'm in like regular Arabic speaking classes, closest thing I can do is like try to assimilate into the Arab world. What does that mean? Getting rid of like my Sudanese accent, never speaking about my culture, never once playing my music for anyone, and like trying to hide this aspect of my identity as much as possible, straightening my hair for events. Bleaching my skin was like a topic that often came up with my family, still comes up with my family, stuff like that. And even coming to college, I still identified, at that point, I now identified as Afro-Arab. I joined SAS, which like is also running a lot of this, the Arab Students Association here. I was on SAS board for 3 years, ran a lot of the events, coordinated a lot of the events, and as of last year, I no longer identify as Arab at all. I don't think that this identity fits me. I don't think that it necessarily is like a space that has become accommodating of who I am, no matter what I have done to try to make that space so. And I think that that's an unfortunate reality, but it's also one that we have to be conscious of, like the fluidity of identity and how our actions may impact the way that people perceive themselves too. That kind of brings me into my next question on what the taboo is that really exists around this conversation in the Arab world. So I'm sure you all noticed this as well, but when the George Floyd murder took place, while we saw solidarity from like the Arab community, we also saw this huge resistance to acknowledging the complicity of the community in perpetuating racism and anti-Blackness. I don't know if I'm speaking to the microphone. Interestingly enough, however, there's also like an enormous co-opting of Black culture amongst Arabs in the diaspora and in the Arab world, especially younger generations, in everything from language to the use of AAVE, which is like African American Vernacular English, to music, and quite unfortunately, often the entitlement to using the N-word as well. So why is it considered a great shame to sort of speak about topics such as race, racism, colorism, and anti-Blackness in Arab communities and in the Arab world, but also like this paradoxical, simultaneous feeling of entitlement to co-opting Black culture?
I love your questions. But yeah, actually, I'm so glad you mentioned the census thing because that's like a very concrete example of proximity to whiteness leading to benefits, et cetera, et cetera. But it's also like something that you have to think about, like, well, are people pushing back against it now because they personally don't feel white? Or are they pushing back against it now because, again, for the benefits? Because that's something that I was going to say about the African diaspora, right? Being in the African diaspora, getting scholarships, going to school, like getting straight A's, whatever else it is. Like in college, you'd always hear things like, oh, cultural appropriation, not cultural, sorry, I'll tell you about this in a second. What is it called? Affirmative action, yeah. Affirmative action this, affirmative action that. But then when you actually look at the institutions and how it is they actually get around affirmative action, is that they let people like us into school who are scoring better than our white counterparts and whatever else it is. And then in the school, we still get, we still have to face that racism. So the question is the system and how it works and all these different things. What's the taboo about talking about it? This idea that Arabs don't see color because of solidarity or whatever else it is. I want to actually talk about the idea of protest. I want you guys to raise your hand if you've ever been to a protest. Great. Keep your hand up if you've ever been to a Palestine protest. Keep your hand up if you've ever been to a Syria protest. Keep your hand up if you've ever been to a protest about Yemen. Keep your hand up or raise your hand back up if you've ever been to a protest about Sudan. Nice, I'm actually very surprised in a good way. What about Somalia? The Rohingya. Nice, nice. Actually, I'm so glad people's hands are still up. So this is an exercise I like to do in spaces that are Muslim, places that are Arab, and different things like that. You think about the collective struggle or the things that whenever you're trying to figure out what people agree on or when you're trying to bring people to a table, what I like to do is I start to figure out, okay, where is the last point of convergence? Palestine tends to be a point of convergence among Arabs, right, in the Arab world. Among Palestinian people, there tends to be solidarity and consensus that they support and identify with the Black struggle, not just in the US, but all around the world. The first and always like the most amazing things that I see coming from the Arab world in solidarity with Black people in the US and vice versa is about Palestine. When Flint happened, there were kids in Gaza and in the West Bank just holding up all these signs about being with Flint. Same thing with George Floyd, same thing with Sudan, same thing with, why is that? I'll tell you in a second. Same thing with the Black Panther movement, with the civil rights movement, Free Palestine shirts, who was wearing them? Free Palestine movement, who brought it to the US? Black people. Why is that? Why is it that people who are united in struggle or who recognize oppression, who've experienced it before, are the first people to have empathy towards it? Because a lot of people don't have empathy for something if they haven't experienced it themselves. A lot of people who say Free Palestine, who support it, and myself included, but not myself included in this next part that I'm going to say later on. But a lot of people who support the struggle are supporting it not because they're really thinking about what it really means or what the struggle really means and why it is that people in Palestine understand people in Darfur better than someone in Khartoum, or why is it that we understand each other better here. How do you say, I'm seeing Black Lives Matter posters in different places. It's happening in Tunisia now. I'll tell you about that in a second. Why is it that it takes having to go through it to actually talk about it? Why is it that the right people have to die before anyone will notice? A lot of people all over the Arabic world, even in the speeches yesterday from the keynotes, fellow keynotes, I love the speeches and everything, but again, for me, sitting in the audience, having spoken for a lot of different struggles and having experienced some of them, hearing about shuhada fi Palestine and hearing about all these different things, it is very, it's very, how do you say? It's very humbling and it's powerful, but I'm like, why can't we have the same energy for struggles that aren't necessarily just Palestine when Palestinian people themselves are in support of the other struggles? Why is it that Palestinian people are our best allies, but other Arabs who are allies to Palestine and all of that? No, you can actually say, yeah. That's my question. My question is it because it's easier? Is it because of the same answers that we hear about Ukraine? As someone from, working with UNHCR and all these things, it was very hard to see how Europe opened all the doors and did all of this for Ukraine. And I'm not saying that it's not good. It's great. Always help refugees, and we're working on helping expand that sentiment to other refugees. But why was the door closed to Syria? Why was the door closed to Arabs? Why was it closed to Africans? Why are people sent back? Why are boats shot down? Literally what they said is because, they look like me. They look like my son. They have blonde hair and blue eyes. There are interviews of this. They have blonde hair and blue eyes. It could be me, It's the same thing. It's the same question over and over again. Why, when Darfur first became a thing, why were the first people to help us in Philly were Holocaust survivors and children of Holocaust survivors? Why were they the first people to speak up about it? Because they've experienced it themselves. My question about all of this, or my question to the question, or my thing is why is it taboo to talk about these things? Because again, I said it earlier, but people can't admit that when they are otherized, that there are different levels of otherizing, and you can also be someone who is oppressing someone else by feeding into a system that oppresses others. Why did I say that you guys are the white man? Not everyone, of course, but why did I say that? Because when you put it in that context, when you tell somebody, okay, would you be okay with this if it was Philistine? They'd say, no, I would not be okay with it. I'm like, so then why are you okay with people talking about Black people in the Arab world or other places in this very, very prejudiced way or this negative way? Because we have made it okay. We've sort of like, how do you say? We've normalized it. There we go. English is not my first language. We've normalized it. We've normalized the idea of talking about certain struggles and championing certain struggles. And I love what you said about being from a Muslim school or going to a Muslim school, because some of the biggest proponents of this or perpetrators of this are people who are Desi or people from other spaces in the Muslim world as well, who think of Palestine as a Muslim struggle and not a Philistine struggle. And that's something huge. Like, a lot of times I'm just like, guys, do you have Philistine friends? Like, do you help them out? Do you know what it's like? Like, that's something huge. Anyway, so a reason I think that it's very taboo is because it's so ingrained in our system, that idea that proximity to whiteness means that we're successful. We're finally the countries in the world that could be world leaders. We're not what they say about us in the media. We're not the terrorists or the what do they call it? The Alibaba's 40 thieves or whatever. All the very, like, what? We're not those guys. No. We're a lot more like Joe Schmo sitting in the office, in Congress or whatever. Why is it that proximity to whiteness helps and proximity to Blackness is negative? Because we took those systems from the old times and we just copy-pasted them into what's happening now. If you go and try to get a job in different Arab countries, or even with the degrees that we have here, if you are like sitting together, like Harvard, Yale, other places, same degrees, similar resumes, whatever it is, and you apply for a job, let's say at like McKinsey, Dubai, or different places, like, will you be accepted? My experience, that's another story. I won't talk about it. I was accepted, but they told me, do anything else for a year because it feels like a crime, and I did poetry and never looked back. But what I'm trying to say is, like, even in those spaces when you go to those jobs, I have friends, and I've had experiences of friends saying that, like, well, actually, certain countries they can't go to, whether they're women, whether they're Black, whatever it is. Certain countries they can't be sent there. Why is that? Because those systems still exist over there. And how do we start addressing them? How do we shift that taboo? We have to start thinking about, okay, are we supporting certain causes or going to protest or saying that we're like otherized or that we're the revolutionaries and all this stuff because we're proud to be Arab and Palestine represents the Arabs, and we just really feel like we can co-opt their struggle to like say that we shouldn't have racism against Arabs? Or are we actually really thinking about what it means to be oppressed and how we can shift that oppression and how, everything from, supporting certain countries, or like, I work for the UN, I can't say certain things, but why is it, like, think about it, like, think about how it is that, if you think about this, if you think about in any moment, actually there's a poem for this, I'm gonna read this poem. It's easier to say the poem than it is to like explain everything else. But that's my sort of answer. The answer is, like, if you think about it, we have this long history of slavery in the Arab world that still exists now with the kafala system. You saw with the World Cup, you saw what was going on with that. You see people all the time. I'm sure you guys saw the video of the young woman who was basically thrown out of a window and people thought it was chill in Lebanon. Or like the idea of using Islam to reinforce systems that predate Islam. Like, slavery predates Islam. And so does a lot of the systems that exist in this space. But people use other systems to reinforce these things. Why do we let it be okay? Because we kind of say, like, well, I guess the imams know better, or I guess, this government person knows better, or I guess, we forget that we have power, and in that way, we're actually giving up our power to change these things. I'm gonna read this poem to you guys. It's such a tough conversation, but I'm so excited about it. Because it's very serious, like, anyway. I forgot what I was doing. What did I say I was going to do?
Read the poem.
I was reading a poem, right. Sorry. Okay, you know what? Maybe I'll save it to the end. Let's do the next question.
Okay. Just like a really quick comment on this too, and like how internalized I think the taboo is too. So I like, haven't talked to my parents for like a while in a few days now. Writing my senior thesis. It's due on Wednesday, so it's been a tough time. I FaceTimed my mom this morning, and I told her that like, oh, by the way, Mama, I'm moderating a panel on this today. And she's like, well, first she asked me what moderating meant, and then afterwards was like this topic is so internalized, I think, that there's like a lot of, especially within like Black people who identify as Arab too. She was like, no, but why do you feel the need to like talk about this, right? Like, why is it important? You shouldn't let these things touch you when like people say stuff to you, stuff like that. And so I was trying to think of how to relate this to her. And I was like, you know, Mama, like I wear my Blackness as like a badge of honor. And I wear my Sudani identity as like a badge of honor. But here's the thing, when like, the thing is like, for example, I gave her this example. You probably know, but peanut butter is called food Sudani, right? In the Levant, as I learned after I came to college, it's actually called food abid. And
Really?
abid means slaves, right? And I was like, okay, so Sudaniness and Blackness is a part of my badge of honor, and when people say this, and when I let this go, because like it doesn't touch me, I am telling them that it is okay to equate like Sudan and Sudanese with slavery, and that's not okay. Like Blackness can never be equated with subordination of people, and that's what it has been like for generations. But like this just goes to show you how internalized this taboo is. I mean, at the end of the day, my mom is a Black woman. Yeah, sure, she's a little lighter skinned than me, but like she's a Black woman. But like these conversations are like, we're taught to fear them, and we're taught that they're not okay. And like, this is why this is so important.
I'm so proud of you. Literally, I got so excited.
Yes. Okay, so I want to also be conscious of time. So I'm going to skip to like, technically, I guess, our fifth question, our last question. But yeah, I think it's clear, we talked about this quite a bit, but like I think it's clear that the Arab world is definitely behind on its racial reckoning, and that it's up to the newer generations to be the change that brings that about. So what does being actively anti-racist actually look like? What does it take to overcome the taboos and work towards anti-racism, not just on an individual level, but to gain the courage to take this discussion and fight to our communities as well?
I love this. Just to comment on what you said, think about, you understand Orientalism, right? It's like the otherizing of Arabs and people from the East and like that whole like whatever. Take that and just apply it to Black people as anti-Blackness and start to understand that analogy. Anything that you wouldn't feel comfortable hearing said about Arabs, don't say it about Black people, period. There's something else that's really important that you touched on. So how does it look like right now? I actually think that the Arab world is more advanced than it used to be in actually talking about this in some places. So right now, the conversation happening in North Africa is going to happen faster than it will happen in MENA, but we can change that and shift that as well. Has anyone heard what's going on in Tunisia? Yeah? So basically, the president said that he was going to kick out all the migrants because they have an agenda to change the demographics of Tunisia, and they're all from sub-Saharan Africa. And subhanAllah, like Tunisians are up, like they're saying, like most people are like in protesting about it, and they're saying, no, like you can't say that about Blackness, it's racist, it's fascist, لا للعنصرية والفاشية, like they're saying all of this stuff, they're holding Black Lives Matter posters, and they're really, really talking about this. This is something that I kind of forgot to say earlier, but a lot of the modes of protests in the Arab Spring, in Palestine, in Sudan, came from the Black civil rights movement. Like people learning about those different things like sit-ins and all those. They came from those movements. Movements exchange information all of the time. That's cultural exchange, not appropriation, which we'll touch on as well. But my answer to this is actually something that exists in the room, what happened in the room today. We need to start changing how we talk about these different things. A lot of people will use the word, like, I think the word origin in Arabic is like asl, right? What's interesting about asl is that when you're talking about those usul, or you're talking about us, you could be talking about your origin, like, oh, well, what's your asl? You're Arab, right? But it also could mean asli. It also could mean that word authentic. And so a lot of people will say that Arabs who are black are not real Arabs. We're like counterfeit Arabs. It's like, yeah, you're Arab, but ma asliyan, right? And these kind of small microaggressions, they're microaggressions. I don't think we address them or talk about them in the Arab world. When people talk about these different things, I think it's fine for me or Reem or anyone else in this room to qualify their own identity, but when other people are telling you who you are, that's not okay, right? And I think that we need to start from the point that we all agree on and move as quickly as possible to this point of understanding and recognizing that we need to speak up against anti-blackness when we see it, because there are going to be spaces that you enter that we can't enter, or someone to your left or right can't enter. And there's going to be all these different layers to this conversation that need to happen. What's really curious to me is like when I'm talking about these different things, it's like I had to learn to talk about this in English, and I had to learn to talk about it like very diplomatically. Only because I think that you have to catch people off guard because we're so desensitized, right? Some people will hear you mention the word black or like be scared, like moms would be. I didn't even tell my parents what the talk was about, but now they would understand. Now they're just like, yeah, you know. But before, I was telling Reem earlier when I was very young, I was complaining to my dad about something having to do with this random uncle who's not even my uncle, telling me that I can't marry someone outside of the tribe because my children will not be part of the tribe. And I'm just like, you're the worst. And I was like telling my dad, and he's like, well, technically it's a tribe rules. I'm like, but dad, it's wrong, right? So like this history, this culture, this tradition is so important to us as Afro-Arabs or whatever it is. It's so important, but it's used to perpetuate oppression. Like, how do we start changing it? Who gets to define tradition? As an anthropologist, tradition is what you built, right? What I'm trying to say is, I was like, Dad, it's sexist. And he's like, what? What's that? I'm like, it's racist, but against women. And he's like, oh, right? So that's something that's like, it's happening all over the world today. You find the different generations that are having these conversations. You need to listen to black people. That's the first thing. Listen to black people. Don't pigeonhole black people. Like, just because somebody is black doesn't mean that they're going to educate you on all of these different things. I learned some things before this, but also like speaking as an anthropologist or like someone who is a Goodwill Ambassador working with refugees, someone who's a field worker, all these different things. Actually work as part of a telehealth company that's on the continent, started in Libya, it's spreading all over the continent now. That's different than going to your friend that you eat lunch with and go like, hey, can you tell me about the history of slavery in the Arab world? It's like someone randomly came up to me and was just like, what are your opinions about Israel and Palestine? And I was like, are you asking me as a Palestinian? Like, I'm not Palestinian, but I do have opinions. And they're like, no, I'm asking you because you're and they didn't even know what to say. Like, I was like, I'm what? And I just waited, and they were like, I don't know, like, I was like, American? Like, which one is it? Like, why are you asking me? And they're like, I don't know, right? And so it's like, you have to challenge these perceptions. And if I'm gonna give you a list of things to do, like today, that you can do, first thing is probably read, if you're in America, right, you literally are there right now, but if you're studying here, whatever else it is, you're gonna be living here for 4 years. Massachusetts, Boston specifically, sometimes Cambridge, but it's one of the most racist places in the U.S., and a lot of people don't know about it, right? And so my little brother and I came because I was getting an award from the African Student Association and the African Center. It was really cool, the Vanguard Award, and my brother, the first thing he tweets when he lands, just landed in Boston, and I got microaggressed, and I'm like, oh my God. But the point is, like, you need to educate yourself. So there's 2 books that I'm going to tell you to read, because I guess everyone's academic, right? So first one is read The New Jim Crow. Just read it, learn about it, understand mass incarceration, understand why it is that the first people to speak up against all of the young people and older people who are in jail right now in different places in the Arab world are people who are here in the US dealing with the same thing, mass incarceration of black people, of black men. When Angela Davis, amazing Black Panther, was in, in jail, people in Palestine were talking about freeing her and things like that. Educate yourself on the systems where you are. Read That one is a good one. I was gonna say to read Orientalism as well, but I don't know if everybody's gonna totally understand like a very anthropological piece. Just start with the New Jim Crow. Start with that one. And another thing that I want you to do is look up different events that are happening around here, see the gaps and fill them. Like this is Women's History Month. I would love to see this not be the only event that is gonna happen about this. She's the only Black moderator at this conference. I'm the only Black speaker at this conference. Next year, we're gonna see you next year. What panels are you planning? What things? Like start planning it from now. Start talking. Tell them that you want to see more stuff like this. Because generally speaking, if people don't say that they want to learn about it, then the conference is not going to prioritize it. So educate yourself is the first one. Learn about the kafala system. I'm going to ask you if you have recommendations for reading about it and different things like that. Learn about what's going on right now. I do a lot of anti-trafficking and anti-modern slavery work, anti-labor and trafficking and things. People don't understand that if you're not speaking up against something, you're complicit, you're supporting it, right? That. And the last thing was, we didn't get to mention this enough, but a lot of people think it's really cool to be Black. And so it's something that's being talked about a lot, right? So it's like, why do people get lip fillers? Because they want bigger lips like Black people. Why do people get BBLs and different things? But it's fine to look Black or braid your hair or like say the N-word or like, listen to rap and try to be a rapper or like wear whatever you want to wear, as long as you're not actually Black. Why? Why is that? Because that's what cultural appropriation is about. It's the fact that something that is a natural feature of someone who is Black and is used to oppress them can be used to say that someone like, oh, I don't know, Kim Kardashian is avant-garde for inventing braids. Like I've seen so many different ways that people are erased on a daily basis. The last thing that I'll say is keep an eye out for erasure. When we don't talk about people's, how do we say this? When we don't acknowledge the kind of oppression that people have gone through. When we say, oh, no, Arabs love everyone. I saw this video that was really weird where someone was saying, oh, Arab people who hate Black people are only hating Black people because an actual Black person wronged them. And I'm like, what is all of this mental gymnastics that you're doing? And I'm just like, okay, so like, do you hate all like British people or like, but that's my question. Like, how do we all together push back against erasure? We need to have more conversations like these. It can't only be, us. It can't only be pushing so hard. Like, you're going to graduate. You're doing your senior thesis. Is the panel still going to happen next year? Like, that shouldn't be a question. This should be something that we're really engaging in. I know that we're almost out of time, so I was going to ask for questions or, like, let you say whatever. And
yeah, we are almost out of time. So I think that in the interest of, like, the conference things, maybe we'll have you perform your poem, and then if people have questions, they can also, like, or like outside, so that's the next panel.
We can't take like one or two, or is it?
Maybe
okay. One?
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk this long.
We'll take these two.
Okay. Say the questions together, and then we'll answer them together and do the poem, and then run.
So
he's an amazing.
One thing that I want to ask about is the deep Blackness of what it means to be Arab. And what I mean by that is that historically, if you read the text, the dictionary, lexicon, like the Mansour, Lisan al-Arab is like a very classical Arab dictionary from like the 1300s. And in it, it defines the term aswad al-jilda, which means like black of skin, as khalis al-Arab, the pure Arab people. So the pure Arab people is black. So it means if you don't look black, you're probably not pure Arab. And what's interesting about that is that, even as we explore sort of the Islam, like the movement of Islam, and how it changed and evolved what it meant to be of certain colors, the original description used of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was that he was asmar al-lawn, which it means like brownness of color. And if you read what that brownness means, it's what today we would generally refer to as, black, like the lighter shades of black people. And the Banu Hashim tribe that's black, and that's also the name of the first black, Adam,
Yeah.
right? Who was also known to be of that skin color. But if you read and if you go to Sunday school in this country, you wouldn't realize, that's what these people look like, or that Moses is described as a black man, as Adam alone as well, right? So how do we sort of, of course, historically, especially this is Abbasid empire falling and the decline of them and the movement of where the sort of historical centers of literature and Arab history and the writing of a lot of content, as those moved and became sort of more light-skinned places, that obviously affected the way that a lot of this stuff was done. And of course, other places are not immune to this, right? If you go to church here in this country, you'll probably see a very white-washed version of who Jesus was too. So it's a global phenomenon and problem. But what can we specifically do in the Arab world to reclaim that tradition?
Thank you. It's beautiful. Sorry.
In the interest,
So we just
yeah, I just want to make
Sorry.
sure we're respecting this because I'm so sorry.
Sorry. I feel so bad. Okay. So the quick answer is we need to decolonize the definition of Arab. We need to decolonize our minds. And we need to stop letting the white man be the person or the entity or the idea that we're trying to get validation from, right? Thank you. Yes. I'm serious. Think about it. Who isn't? Why do you need approval from the white man? Why is it? Also, asmar means dark. It doesn't just mean light or black. It just means dark. Santa Claus is black. No, I'm kidding. But anyway, so these things are important. Also, scientifically speaking, because I did study molecular biology, whatever, mitochondrial Eve, right? So, probably, but mitochondrial Eve is so everybody understands the mitochondria? There's something in our bodies that tells you that everyone has the same ancestor who was a black woman, right? So that's another thing. And that lightness in skin is actually a genetic mutation they're learning about, so that's something else. But that's something that we have to do. We have to decolonize those ideas, and we have to tell those stories more, right? You're going to go into spaces. You're going to give talks someday. You're going to be talking about these different things. You're also going to be asked about things like blackness in the Arab world because you might be the closest thing to black that someone knows. You might be the closest thing in the field that you're in. I work a lot with physicists and all this stuff, and I remember at some point he's just like, I can't even hire someone at my level. I'm like, do you know why that is? I'm guys. But you're going to be asked these questions, and I need you to remember what allyship is. We need allies in these spaces. Allyship is not taking a microphone and saying, hey, everyone, you have to listen and learn about why it is that, we need to stop anti-blackness and racism or blah, 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 right? You need to take the microphone and say, hey, everyone, so-and-so has something to say, and then pass the mic. Because you need to take your privilege and use it, I love you guys, use it to build platforms, to platform other people. You have power in these spaces. You are the consumers of this conference, and you're also going to have power as alumni. You're going to be making decisions and different things like that. You know at least 2 black people. And that was mean, I'm sorry. But you know people, and you're going to, it's not wrong, yeah, right? But you're going to be able to actually pass the mic, that's important. to answer your question, totally forgot what it was. Hold on, it was in my mind. What was it? It was something important.
The power of identity.
Power of identity, there we go.
Yeah.
My answer was earlier. It was that as long as you're deciding, that's the important thing. I had a friend who was white in college, and it was really interesting. I say friend loosely, but it was interesting because he was just like, I've never had to think about my identity. I'm like, yeah, because white Anglo-Saxon male is an identity, but we've been tricked into thinking that it's not an identity. So like whenever somebody says to you, well, that's identity politics, say, well, whose identity? Because what's your identity, right? Because everyone has an identity, right? It's just that some identities are considered taboo or have been marginalized or weaponized or whatever else it is. So rhetoric is way more important than you possibly could think that it is. You can decide who you want to be. You can decide who you are. It took me a while to call myself a poet, you know? Like there are all these different things. But yeah, there's an exercise that I do for poetry workshops. I'll have you guys do this exercise later for yourselves on your own. Homework, yay. Ask yourselves this question and start introducing yourself in this way. I tell them, what are three things that I would need to know about you to even begin to understand you? Because you're a person and people categorize and they think it's easier to just say, I'm this and that, I'm a student, I'm whatever. Ask yourself that thing. If you had 3 things that you wanted me to know about you, to even begin to understand you, what would those be? And use that to start unlocking your identity. Thank you. I'm going to read the poem. Thank you, guys. Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.